Okay, my talk tonight is on we're here to help you. And it seems sort of that's a smile, and everybody knows when the auditor comes in and says, we're here to help you, that they really mean it. And so we're going to talk about getting the upper hand with your auditor tonight, and we're going to cover. Where do I thought I clicked that.
Yeah.
There we are. Okay. So the outline tonight, we're going to talk something about how does an external auditor like myself in the last 20 years become an auditor in the first place to do external auditing, and what that process is. And I'm just going to basically glance over that. Why was our auditor selected? We have people in the group today that are going through the certification process, and how did that auditor's name or how did that auditor get scheduled for the work that we're going to get certified, and what can we expect during the initial visit and the certification audit for those of you who haven't gone through it. And we can also talk about the surveillance audits and the recertification audits that come about. What techniques will the auditor be using in approaching this? And we're not going to talk specifically about ISO 9001, except I think most of that is in that arena. But this could be applied to an ASME audit, could be applied to an ISO 13485 audit, for aerospace audit, etc. And then understanding the company's choices. What choices do we have within the certification process on our side of the fence as a company? Are our hands tied, or do we have some flexibility in what we can do? And then I'm going to open it up for a general discussion, Q&A session. But if anybody's got any questions at all during the presentation, certainly raise your hand and ask the question, and we'll try to answer those. And this will be a very short presentation if somebody doesn't ask a question or two. Okay, becoming an auditor. Where does this all start? And I'm not going to get into a lot of details, but it starts with the IAF. The IAF is a World Association of Conformity Assessment Accreditation bodies and other bodies interested in conformity assessment in the fields of management system, product services, personnel, and other similar programs of conformity assessment. So it all starts with this group.
What does IAF stand for?
IAF. Well, I think it alludes to it here. It's the assessment. It's, I think, International Assessment Forum, or Accreditation Forum. And their primary function is basically to develop a single worldwide program of conformity assessment, and this is going to reduce the risk for businesses like the ones you're in and its customers by assuring them that accredited certificates can be relied upon. Accreditation assures users of the competence and impartiality of a body accredited. So if you're dealing, let's say, with a college, we're going to have a school of medicine down at WSU. Before they can get started, they're going to have to be accredited by somebody. So there's a group of people that are going to do that accreditation, and they're going to come in and make sure that they have professors, teachers, that they got course outlines, that they have equipment necessary in order to issue a degree for a medical doctor, just like all the colleges do today for various levels of bachelor's degrees in mechanical engineering or in business. And then there's got to be an accreditation in order to issue master's degrees and doctorates. So these are the guys that set up the primary policies in directing that. Right now, there's the IAF members and signatories, there's 63 countries that are represented with this IAF group. And that includes a host of various countries. The United States, if you take this link that I've put on here, iaf.nu, that you can look at the IAF website, and you'll find the 63 countries that are represented. And if you click on those links, here in the United States, there's 3. AL2A for calibration purposes. The ANAB is another accreditation body, and ANSI, another accreditation body here in this group. There we go. So how does one become an auditor? First of all, an auditor that wants to be an auditor, a prospective person, has to apply for certification, and they do that with groups like IRC, IRCA as it's pronounced, in the UK. Here in the United States is Exemplar Global. And at some point in time, you have to pass a lead auditor training, which is a 5-day course, and you do all of this. Then you have to attend audits as an observer, as an auditor, and then as an acting lead auditor, and there's a number of audit days that have to be accomplished at each one of those levels. And you have to contract with the CB. We used to call them registrars, now they call them certification bodies, as opposed to an accreditation body here in the United States. For the certifications that you have at ISO 9001, it's ANAB. So, and you notice there's a trend here. You can see sort of a trend throughout this certification process for somebody like me, and that's pay money. Now, becoming an auditor for a CB, the auditor completes documentation regarding competencies. So if you're going to have auditors, you have to know what their competencies are before you can assign them any work. And so the first thing that they'll probably do is complete a resume and submit one. That way we know what your background and work experience is. Then they're going to probably have to list those competencies for various industry codes and complexities. There's NACE codes, European type of industry codes, and then there's standard codes, the SIC, which are standard industry codes. If I'm going into the hospital business and I'm going to audit a hospital to ISO 9001, you have an industry code for your kind of work. In fact, the way that's established with your certification body is you give them the scope of your certification that you want, and then they'll go down and select a code for that. Now, once we have that code that's necessary, we can go down the list and say who's qualified for that code. And ending up with writing all this down, documentation, listing your education, training, work experience, audits if you performed. Then there's an oral discussion with the subject matter expert. And then the holy water comes out and we bless you as being able to audit that SIC code. And of course, if you're an auditor for one of these companies, the more SIC codes you're qualified to do, the more work you're going to get. Sometimes you get too much work. But why was your auditor selected? And in the case of, let's say, a manufacturing company or a hospital or other industry, it's based on their competencies in that industry. And then it's looked at lesser by location in order to reduce travel expenses. If we have a local auditor in Spokane and they've got the SIC code, they can do the audit. And to a lesser extent, they look at personality and audit approach. If somebody has some experience with a particular company and they know the kind of company they are, we can sort of, before we issue a schedule and on things, we can go ahead and select somebody that's going to have that kind of personality. I think probably all of us have been at a party at one time, and you're meeting people, and sometimes just don't like them right off the bat. So we don't want to put that kind of a person in a company that we know that they're not going to be appreciated because maybe personalities differ. Any questions up to this point? No? Okay. What techniques will the auditor use? My personal preference is waterboarding. But certainly friendly, trying to put the auditee at ease. You catch more flies with honey. So the person is going to review the documentation, procedures, objectives, and then the audit process is based on the standard, obviously, but more importantly, your documented processes, or if they're not documented, what processes you have. So when an external auditor comes in, and you don't have a documented process because it's not required, or maybe we only have one purchasing agent. Why do we need a written procedure for purchasing if one person's doing it and they've got a backup? But so in a case like that, the auditor is going to sort of ask a lot of questions about what the process is, and make a few notes about things, and then see that that's what you're doing, and maybe even talk to the next person and see if we got some commonality on things. And they're going to be tenacious. An auditor has to know how to dig into and follow the paper trail, follow the process trail. And at this point, everybody's going to have their own techniques. Each individual auditor is going to be a little bit different. Setting somebody at ease. What I used to do is I'd go into somebody's cubicle and sit down, and I think Lon can attribute to this, but I'll sit down and I'll sort of look around the cubicle, because a lot of people will put stuff on the wall. I've got horses. I got a cat calendar. I've got my kids and they're playing football. So when an auditor comes in from externally that you don't know, there's a lot of anxiety there, and we certainly want to relieve that anxiety, and so I'll probably strike up a conversation a little bit about, oh, you've got horses. Well, I don't own a horse, but I do ride and I like them. Maybe there's a picture of you there with a big long glove up to your shoulder, so we'll talk about that. So it's important, number one, that the person that comes in, what I want to say is there's a lot of concern sometimes that an auditor will come in, and are they going to know our business, or are they going to understand what we do? Well, you could see through the process that an auditor has got to go through a lot of hoops in order to just get qualified for that SIC code. They're going to have work experience, education, and in some cases they're going to have some audit experience or do auditing under a mentor, subject matter expert, in that area in order to get qualified to go out there on their own to do those audits. So the person that comes in is going to be a pretty qualified person, and some of them are going to understand the business better than others. I could go in to size business. They make tanks. They make ASME tanks. Well, I've got a lot of ASME experience and made Section 8 tanks just like he's building. Maybe a little bit different. Mine were maybe 4 inches thick. Yours are only sheet metal, but the process is the same. So it helps a person that's 20 years old or 25 years old is not going to make a good auditor because they really haven't had the work experience yet. So you'll find that your auditors are going to be on the middle age side, and there's not that many auditors going around. You think that there's a plethora of these folks, and there's really not. And I encourage, if somebody's generally interested in this, to get interested and apply. And what techniques will the auditors use? Remember, we are here to help. And that's a serious comment, because a CB and their auditors know you are their customers and you have choices. It's no different than you folks. You have customers. Wagstaff has customers. Kootenai Health has customers. And if you've ever worked in any kind of retail business, you have customers there. And so, the customer may not be right, but they are the customer. So we look at the same thing as a CB, and you need to think like a customer. The CB isn't going to make any money. You're in business to make money. In all the businesses you have, a CB is in the business of making money too. So the first thing they want to do is make sure that you're happy, and not upset you, because you do have choices. And we're here to help you is really an honest statement that even if we have findings, there are opportunities for improvement. We don't write them if they're not necessary to write. Nonconformities come in a couple of packages. One is a nonconformity, minor. It doesn't mean that the process is out of control, but we've got some hiccups. We've got a parking ticket here and there. Some people call them bents and breaks. Some people call them opportunities for improvement. There's all kinds of ways of dealing with these things, but we go in and we write a finding as an external auditor. It's got to be based on something. It can't be subjective. Here's what the requirement was. Your procedure says that you do something in a particular manner. We found that it wasn't always being done that way, and here's some examples of what happened. And if you write findings, and even internal audits the same way, you can write a subjective audit finding, but you'll find that you probably have more respect if you sit there and make an observation if something is maybe marginal. If somebody's failed on something, then write it up. Major findings are those processes out of control. Give you an example. I think in the 20 years that I was auditing as an external auditor, I only recommended suspension of a certificate once. And the situation was I had written a minor finding in purchasing because we had a little hiccup. I came back the next year, and I had to close out the finding from the previous audit. I looked at the corrective action they planned and what they plan on the root cause analysis. And I went in there to close it out and find out, whoa, same issue. It wasn't effective, whatever they did. So I didn't have much of a choice. It was an aerospace company. And in those particular cases, it's much more prescriptive, and I had to write a major finding. So then I had to come back and do a follow-up to close that out. We closed the follow-up audit. I came back the next year. I looked at the process again. Same problem. So I didn't have much of a choice but to write a major finding and continue that, and recommended somebody for suspension with the certification body. Now that doesn't mean you lose your certificate. When somebody says suspending a certificate, that means that, okay, we're not going to allow you to move forward with advertising your company as being ISO 9001 certified until such time as we get this back online and the process is working again. And then we can take that suspension off. So it doesn't mean that you lose the certificate that's on the wall. So, and this, when you're doing a certification audit at that point, your lead auditor ought to be explaining all of this to you during the opening and closing meetings. So understanding what choices that you have. You have choices in scheduling the audits. It's a lot like getting a reservation on the airplane and getting the seat that you want. So if you buy a ticket on the airline and you're flying tomorrow, chances are you might be sitting in a center seat. But if you push it out a little bit, you can probably get the schedule that you want. Sometimes there's a requirement, you've got a customer coming in and you want to reschedule that audit. And that's where the CB you've selected, it's important if you have a CB that's more flexible, because they're a larger certification body with 150 auditors to select from, and numerous ones have that SIC code. Then it's much more flexible than the CB out there that's got 3 auditors on the staff, and they can't be that flexible. We got to do it today or else, kind of thing. You have rights in selecting the audit team leader and the members that are going to be on that audit. If you're going through a certification audit and they've given you a name of somebody that's going to be your auditor, ask for the resume. Find out who that person is, because you'll find out his background, his or her background. You'll find out their auditing experience, what kind of industry experience they've had, and that'll certainly help you feel more comfortable about it. If you look at somebody and says, this person really isn't going to understand what we do, then you can request some changes. Give an example. I had a certification for chemical processing, and in order to get that, you have to have education and work experience in those areas, because that's a critical, complex process. And we had an auditor that also had the same codes, but he was probably more attuned to batch chemical processing, where we put a gallon of this and 50 gallons of that and a pound of this, and we mix it all up, and then we test it. When you do that, then if you've got a non-conforming product, then okay, fine, we can write a red tag, and we can then put it off to the side and figure out what we're going to do with it. This particular company had a continuous chemical process, worked 24/7. It just keeps going. So in a case like that, dealing with non-conforming material really wasn't non-conforming. It was maybe we could put it into a lesser grade, or we can put it in a tank and feed it into the system. So in that particular case, the company, the CB, selected somebody that would better understand a continuous chemical process. So you do have some rights in there to look at the resumes and see who you're dealing with. Replacing auditors for legitimate reasons. Early on, you replaced an auditor because you didn't like the color of their eyes or the style of hair they had. That doesn't happen anymore. If we're going to change an auditor, we have to have some legitimate reasons. And there are legitimate reasons. Maybe personality doesn't match. That's one that you can do. Maybe the person really doesn't understand. Maybe we put this chemical SIC code guy in there that you understood batch auditing, but didn't understand continuous processes. And maybe that was a point of contention, and you can call up the CB, and we can get somebody moved off of that and moved someplace else. It never bothered me if somebody did that to me, because there's always other audits out there, and I understand that a lot of times personalities don't match. And so certainly don't knuckle under and say, oh my gosh, well, if I argue about this and I get this guy changed, the next guy coming in is going to take it out on me. That is not the case. We're here to help. Customer service. A certification body that's making money off of a company because they do certification audits are not going to put their company in jeopardy like that. Challenging nonconformities. Everybody, and if you're new to this process, I think it's probably the same in your manufacturing area at Wagstaff that's certified and has been for a while, that your auditor will probably explain there is a arbitration process, and if they don't, they should. But if you can't come to the meeting of the minds, and after 20 years of doing this kind of work, I think I've been challenged probably 4 times. But in any case, in every case, I was able to resolve it at the lead auditor level. It didn't have to go any further. I think there were some people in that group that used to be in the Navy, because the answers I would get from them is, "You just don't understand." But and sometimes that's the case. Maybe you know more about your process than we do, coming in on an instant basis and trying to establish it. Or maybe the person that I'm talking to or interviewing does not understand what I'm getting at. You will have escorts go around with auditors. And although you're sort of asked to be mum and you're busy taking notes, that's a little technique I used. I'd go in and I'd start auditing, and I'd see the escort was looking at something, and all of a sudden, oops, started writing like mad. Okay, they found something I didn't. So maybe I'll dig a little bit further. But you can challenge these nonconformities. If you come with the lead auditor and you agree to disagree on the finding, you can always take it back to the certification body and say, "Hey, look, I think that this was an unfair finding because this was subjective. He didn't really put any examples down. What about the standard or my process was violated?" And you'll get a very fair answer back from the certification body. But if you don't like that, you can go all the way up to the accreditation body and have them arbitrate it. I doubt if that happens very often. I can say that it really didn't happen very often that a nonconformity was challenged at the CB level. Most of the auditors I dealt with, we work it out on our own right down there, and get that done. And if all else fails, you can certainly transfer your certification to a new certification body if you feel that that certification body isn't meeting your needs. And you've always got that right. So don't worry about an auditor coming back and saying, "Well, they challenged my nonconformity note. Next time I come back, I'm going to rip them a new one." It won't happen. And if it does, a CB will try to weed those people out very quickly. And normally a CB will weed those out as a new contractor comes on board, if they're a contractor. There's observations. They have to do acting lead audits with a mentor from the company. And that person probably won't even make it out as a certified lead auditor for that CB if they've got those tendencies, and they watch for these. So chances are you won't really get involved in that at all. Okay, here's your chance to ask questions and answers. Anybody have any questions about their business? What's going to go on? How is the auditor going to interpret the standard? Is he going to interpret it the same way I am? Anybody got any questions across the room from Kootenai Health on your certification that you're going through?
Yes. The amount of work that we put in to the 6 document procedure, this is specific to ISO 9001.
Okay.
But the amount of work we put in to the implementing the 6 document procedures has been pretty enormous, but I think that's also one of my biggest points of heartburn I don't know how ready we really are. It's really hard for us to benchmark against other healthcare organizations because the number of ISO 9001 organizations it's spread out pretty thin. Most people are in process like we are. So when it comes to the scope, breadth, depth of what they'll look at when they come and look at your control of documents, it's a gray area for us. An example that I've got is that we're currently working on policies and procedures. We're trying to turn these into working documents, make these referenceable. We're trying to cut it down from 1,700 documents to hopefully about 800. But let's take a place like the lab, for instance, where you've got lab workstations with work instructions posted up in front of the workstation where it says, if they're within this parameter, this is what you do. If it's within this parameter, this is your notification, your decision tree. That kind of stuff versus policies and procedures, I don't know is it all or nothing? I mean, is it one of those things where you say, well, look, this is particular to about 3 people. If they just initial and date, is that good enough? Or does it have to be a standardized policy procedure like all of these other ones that we have? That probably corrective action, preventive action as well, because we have right now in our facility about 3 different ways, probably 4 different ways of how we document and track the legacy of corrective preventive actions. I kind of don't know how to prepare for that.
Okay, so generally you're asking within the documentation realm of ISO 9001, what has to be documented into what depth?
Right. Well,
okay.
Because I don't really have a good real-world example that I can grab on.
Oh, okay. Real-world examples. Number 1, ISO 9000 requires specifically certain documented processes, document and data control. How do we control our documents within the company? That's no different than Wagstaff. You have documents that you control. Documents will be different, but how are you going to control these? So you've got to put that down on a piece of paper, that this is how we document things here. This is how we control our external documents, like the ISO 9001, the ISO 9000, and other documents dealing with HIPAA and everything else. Those regulatory documents that we have to have on file so people can refer to them. So how do we control those? Right up front, it says that you have to document your processes to the level that you feel you need to run your business. And that's obviously going to go beyond the standard 6 documents that you probably need. The ones that have to be there are going to be document data control, record control, your nonconformities, your corrective preventive actions, and your internal audit process. Now, when it comes to your hospital procedures or your lab procedures, that's probably all done for you already. Yay! Because you've already got those documented because people have to follow those. Does it have to be anything specific, rev control or date, and it has to be in a certain form? No. You just have to state in your document data control procedure how you're going to control them. Maybe the lab procedures are controlled at a local level. All you have to do then is in your overall policy and procedures, say on document data control, certain lab procedures are going to be controlled locally, and they'll have to maintain some sort of a process down there, which you can dictate in your overall policy procedure on how they're going to do that. They're going to have to keep a list of all those documents and who's got them, where they're located, and how you're going to keep them rev controlled. Do they have to have a date? Do they have to have a rev number on there? You work out the process. How are we going to know? They've got to have something on there that is going to say, okay, I've got the latest and greatest. And yes.
I would add one way of testing your own system before you have the auditor come in is use an intelligent, literate person who's not involved and have them start with the basic documents and see if they can understand what's required. It's, sort of the idiot test.
Yeah.
Only you have to assume the person can read and they are intelligent for it. But that's an easy way of doing it. Is basically you're doing an audit on yourself because the standards can be read, and then if an intelligent person can look at that and say, yes, that meets the standard.
Because we've been trying to rely a lot on that common sense approach, and what I'm hoping that I'm not doing is being too unprescriptive. Because we judge in switching to this model, this accreditation model, this type of quality control model. I mean, we shifted away from joint commission, which usually really kind of they dictate to hospitals very prescriptively. This is how you're going to carry out specific functions. And so whenever we have auditors come through the door, everybody runs and hides. It's a learned response from years and years of just getting used to reviews. So we've tried to do that, but again, I just want to make sure that we were on the right track and we weren't being very
getting on the right track. If you're new to this and you're trying to get into ISO 9000, people have, or any of these quality management system standards, people have a tendency to go overboard with what they've got.
Doing anything.
But so yes, it's prescriptive in that you have to have these 6. But the person coming in is not a second party person that's going to torture you, like DCMA from the government coming in, etc. In fact, we had a DCMA person in the CB that I belonged to, and the gentleman didn't work out. He couldn't get that third party mentality into his head, and it was all, you got to do it this way kind of thing. And so he didn't last very long. He also made somebody cry. We don't like people that make people cry. Way too much stress. But no, the processes that are in the laboratory, they're working, aren't they? Okay, so leave them alone. You have to have some new processes. Maybe you're probably doing internal audits already on the process, right? So write a procedure. Maybe you've even got a procedure written on how you're going to do internal processes. If you don't, write it down the way you're doing it. And it doesn't have to be a bunch of words. People are one of two kinds. They're either picture people or word people. Lawyers and accountants, they're word people. They love to see balance sheets. I suffered when I had to go through and look at balance sheets, and when I got my my MBA, looking at the financials on those things, I spent a half hour looking at that sheet to try to figure it out. But I could take a bar graph from across the room and I could tell you what it said. So in that respect, I've even seen NASA down at the Kennedy Space Center wrote all our procedures as flow diagrams. Didn't write words, it was all flow. So, and what's wrong with that process? You got to map the process anyway, especially if you're doing lean or something else. We got to figure out where everything goes and flows. And once you've done that, you've pretty much got your procedure written for you. When it comes to maybe you want a training procedure within the group, even though it isn't really required, chances are, because you got enough people working this, you want everybody marching, starting off with their left foot. So maybe you'll have a procedure on training, but keep it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. I went into a company once that early on, there were a lot of consultants out there selling documentation packages to companies, and here, buy my stuff and just follow it and you'll be great. The problem was it never matched what the people were doing. I had one consultant that was over on the west side, and he was selling a quality management system that Boeing would have smiled at. But try to apply that to a company with 10 people and procedures this thick. I constantly went in there and had to write findings because there was just way too much stuff that nobody understood. So write it around what you're actually doing today, and then you won't have to train people. Yeah.
Tom, how about videos? That's
Vid-
something which I've been using a lot with my clients, because you just videotape someone doing what they're supposed to be doing, and that becomes the documentation.
I even had Boeing Satellite Systems, when they got certified, and I went down to certify them, they actually had their movie crew in there. And they made I wish I could have found that thing. I think I loaned it to somebody, and I never got it back. But it was a great DVD. Play that, and they had it online, so everybody that could sit at their desk and eat their sandwich and watch this DVD on external auditing and what to expect. And it was done brilliantly. It was humorous, and in one particular case, the auditor would come in and say, "I need to see your records for so and so." And of course, the auditee was sitting over there really, really tense, and said, "Well, the audit records, or these records, are down the hall in the file cabinet. I'll go get them for you." And then the person leaves the cubicle, and you can see him running as fast as he could down the hall in the other direction. So it was very humorous, but it helped ease the pain a lot and the anxiety, because when you go into a company like that, who's been audited by DCMA and the government and everybody else, it's a lot different auditing when a third party like me comes in and says, "I don't really care how you do it as long as it matches or it fits what the ISO standard says." So you can think outside the box. The way I used to, because I certified a company once as a quality manager, and there was a lot of things in there that wasn't, ISO 9001 isn't that prescriptive. It says you got to have a non-conforming system, and it has to have these basic things. But how you apply that is up to you. So keep it simple. That's keep it simple. But yeah, so just don't you want to have enough that you've got some meat in it just for your own selves, because you're going to have to do the internal audits before the certification or the initial visit. Now, I don't know if it's explained to you, but basically the initial visit, or what they call the stage 1 visit now, is basically the lead auditor will come in, and it's a desktop review of your documentation. Are you ready for the certification audit? And so they'll look at the documents. Do you have all the procedures required? Have you established your objectives? Have you done an internal audit of the quality management system? Have you got objectives? Have you had a management review? And so they'll really assess. They're there to assess whether or not you're ready enough for the certification audit or the stage 2 audit. And nobody is really totally ready. So just leap into it, and if you get some findings, you'd correct them, and the certificate goes on the wall. Even if you have a major finding, not a big deal. All you have to do is pull in that process, because the auditor's there to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of the standard and your quality management system is working. That's what they're there for. And it's a snapshot in time at a certification audit, but after that, the process flows. So, any other questions? Any questions from the horse people over there?
We're still pretty new at this.
Well, what kind of things do you do in quality there? Are you trying to get certified to ISO 9000 or 13485 or any kind of a standard?
There's been talk of doing an ISO 9000 of some sort. So we have two main divisions of our company. One is products, which is manufacturing, but that's governed by 9 CFR USDA. And they don't require, it's probably some of the same stuff, but they don't require the ISO 9000. Our other half is services. We follow GLP codes, so 21 CFR,
Okay.
58. To a lesser extent, our customers audit us on that, so it's kind of whatever the customer wants to tweak, we kind of do for them.
All right.
So
Well,
we
then
aren't required to have it, but I think we have our marketing department looking to see if we actually could we get
Okay.
would be beneficial for us to do.
So you know how to get to those CFRs on the internet? Okay. Because for a long time, that was sort of a best kept secret that there was a beta test out there where you could type in electronic CFRs. I can remember the day when the supplements would come out and you had to do some cutting and pasting just to keep up to date. Now they keep it up to date for you.
Which is really nice.
And there's some very interesting CFRs out there. There's one for Homeland Security. I don't recommend, though, going up to the TSA at the Spokane airport and saying, "Excuse me, according to CFR blah blah blah, you can't touch me there." That's when they get the supervisor and they take you off to the side and do some things. Yeah, you're on your own there. Yeah, that's when the TSA guy gets the rubber glove on up to his shoulder.
Hopefully you have to take in your pocket next week.
Well, I tell you what, as much traveling as I did, which was 3 or 4 times a week, and going through TSA, and you get to know everybody, and there was one time I had a corkscrew in there that I totally forgot that I had, and they took it away from me. But it's better than the 59 firearms that are loaded with one in the chamber that you see on their blog site that go through there every week with the phony hand grenades and the things like this. But so yeah, if you're interested in, just get the standards that you need and just go through and review them. If you're doing internal audits to a CFR to see if we're compliant, create your checklist and go through and talk to people to see that they're complying with that records. It's easy. Itron, I think you're still ISO 9001 certified?
Yeah.
Got another CB now, though.
Yeah. I forget where they went with it. You will.
But, okay, any more questions?
No, the one thing back for what they're talking about is we did the classic, 20 years ago, write a whole bunch of documentation, thinking that was the answer. And I think in hindsight, what people need to keep in mind is, will this culture survive an audit? And if the culture does, then do we have the documentation to go with it? And it's a harder concept, but it makes more sense that people have all the practices, and do they understand these things? Do they need to be actually trained? In most cases, probably not, but maybe there are a few places. But do they write the documentation to support them in the audit? The idea of writing the documentation and then making the culture abide by that, it's generally a lot harder, and it probably wastes a lot of time. But
Generally,
in some places, it probably has to be done that way, though.
well, and generally in the electronic industry, people are sitting at tables using solder and paste and things like this that have expiration dates. If I'm going through a manufacturing area that does electronics or pick and place, this kind of thing, that's where I probably find any issues. It's not with the testing that's done. It's going to be with the ancillary stuff. We cannot have food on the table, and I'll find somebody sitting there with a Coke or something like this. It'll be issues like that. It won't be, and I can remember the day I worked in the lab and I'm pouring poisons into a beaker, and there's my other beaker, looks exactly the same size as my coffee cup beaker, because we used to drink coffee out of a beaker at those points, so you had to be careful which one you drank out of. And drying ovens, never ever put a can of chili in the drying oven and walk away from it. Only did that once. But yeah, you tend to go overboard with it. So just keep it simple and write it up against your process that you've got today. And if it's a new process, keep that process simple and keep it easy for people to learn. And when it comes to quality policies, I'm more interested. It doesn't need to be memorized. Quality policy is there. That's the policy that management put down, and this is how we're going to run our business in a quality manner. You set up your objectives. Don't go overboard with your objectives.
They're not me.
Sai's got some very good objectives. He's one of the best that I've seen at putting those kind of things together and measuring them. And it doesn't have to be a bunch of objectives either. You can have some very basic ones in your particular business. Set up some objectives for the lab. Things have to go in and out in a particular time frame. Let's just track them and see that we're running our process through there. How many repeats do we have to do to the process because the numbers didn't really look right? This kind of thing. So those are good good objectives to have. And so if you got an engineering design process, which probably I don't think anybody really, well, you might have. Two good objectives that I've seen people come up with for engineering design to measure the and engineers don't like to be measured, by the way. They're a breed unto themselves. If you ask a manufacturing person to a team to go and take that hill and put a flag on top, they'll just run right out of the shop and they'll run right up that hill with the flag and they'll put it on the top. If you ask the engineering group to do that, they'll say, well, it's getting a little late in the afternoon for this. Maybe tomorrow morning it'd be better, and it's supposed to rain tonight anyway. And why are we taking a hill on the cliffside when we could just drive around on the road in the back? They analyze things. So it's a a different management concept for engineering design. But two good things that you can measure engineers by is reworks. In manufacturing, we measure the reworks that we do. In engineering, there's drawing changes that take place. Those drawing changes could take place because the customer decides he wants it pink instead of green. Or the dimension they want to change. So a customer requirement. Maybe it's something that as a designer we just forgot to put on the drawing, and manufacturing came back and said, where's this? It could be an error that we put on the drawing notes. Or it could be something regarding manufacturability that maybe the manufacturing people that reviewed the drawing didn't take into account. So you can measure those, you can Pareto them. Where are all our problems occurring? You can do the same thing in a hospital environment.
Is it too premature to ask
No.
how the how the emphasis is going to change to 2015? I said 2015 when you talk about the jump from preventive actions and what you're doing to do that recorded as opposed to that risk.
Okay, the new standard coming out this fall. I don't know if it's going to end up in September or maybe later on in the fall before it gets issued. But then there'll be a 3-year probably cycle before it really has to be implemented for sure, and the other one will go away. Before people can certify to that, the auditors will have to go through some class training on interpretation. They may not mention the management representative anymore. The idea is that they're putting the emphasis on top management to get it done. Anybody in this room that's been around in quality for a number of years understands that way back in the day, the quality guys were the cops. They were the negative guys. The glass is half empty. And, just stay out of our way and we'll manufacture this thing and get it out the door. I had and I grew up in that kind of environment, and it's still there today. They've made a lot of improvements, but there's still folks out there from the old guard that still have that attitude that quality, do your thing, and stay out of our way. But most of the companies, the GEs, the Honeywells, the Boeings, the Airbuses, the Triumphs, they've all understood that it's got to be a partnership, and the glass is half full, not half empty. I realized that once when I took some training in ultrasonic testing. I was taking a level 2 course, at one of the industrial colleges in Southern California at the time. And it was being taught by a quality manager from one of the more reputable NDT companies in LA. And the gentleman came in and said, "Hi, my name's so-and-so. I'm the quality manager at this NDT company, non-destructive testing." And I said, "I've been the quality manager there for 25 years. And I'm thinking, whoa, okay. He either has pictures of the boss doing something he shouldn't be doing with, or he married the boss's daughter, one of the two. And after listening to him a while, it was his attitude. If, as the level 3 or the top dog that arbitrated problems, he would be asked to go out and look at the non-destructive testing results. And he would always look at it and say, okay, if it's black, it's no good, reject it. But if it's in that gray area where, yeah, we could call it rejected, but then on the other hand, we could call it accepted too. He would always side with the customer and accept it. The glass is half full. And at the time I was working for Kaiser Steel in Fontana, California. It's now changed a number of names, and when I quit there and went to work with some other industry, the steel industry collapsed. But that's another story. But when I became senior metallurgical engineer in a particular area, which was the soaking pits, primary rolling of ingots, and I took over, all our meetings that we had quality meetings once a month with the superintendent of the plant and everybody else. In that area, the general manager of the plant and everybody else, and we sat there, and my predecessor would always point out, these are the rejections we had, and it started off negatively. And of course, we were the enemy. The metallurgist in there that knew a lot about how the process worked and everything, nobody wanted us up there because we'd tell on them. Well, when I got in there as a senior metallurgical engineer in this area, what I did is I started off differently. Instead of saying we had 11% rejections or diverted heats, I said we had 89% good product go through the mill. Wow. And then I said we've got 11% we can work on, and this is the issues that I had with that 11%, and we can focus on that. 2 days later, the general foreman came over to my office and said, "Hey, Tom, I'm getting together with the foreman on Tuesdays, and if you'd like to come over and be part of the meeting." I was a glass half full guy now. I had melters coming down off the soaking pit saying, "Hey, Tom, what do you know about sand? We're getting a lot of melting over here, and it's dribbling down the walls of the furnace, and it's etching into the brick. Can you give us a little hand on that?" So the glass is half full. You take that attitude, and people will eventually help bend in that area. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions specific to your area after the talk here, come and see me, and we'll try to answer them.